Before we move into our mystical exercise, I want to give you a little more background about labyrinths. I know some of you are very familiar with them already. You know, there are labyrinths that are worldwide, in the various continents of the world, going back millennia, over 5,000 years or more at least. One of the central stories is that of the legend of Daedalus, designing and building the ancient Cretan labyrinth that Theseus traversed in order to slay the Minotaur at the center. And there's profound psychological and mystical meaning to that story. You know, during the medieval period, we have various manuscripts that have drawings of labyrinths. Here's one, the renowned one associated with Villars de Honcourt in the medieval period. Drew various things to do with the medieval master masons' works, but also insects and the labyrinth here. At Amiens Cathedral, which maybe some of you have visited in France, is among some of the great 13th century Notre Dame or Our Lady cathedrals in France. And many of them do have or did have labyrinths. The one that's at Amiens actually is not the original one, but an exact replica was put in its place. I think some of you have walked the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral. It's remarkable, and it's a surviving medieval cathedral labyrinth in its original form there. Today, I'm going to concentrate a fair amount on Reims Cathedral, including with our mystical exercise. But here's a ground plan of Reims Cathedral, and it depicts where the labyrinth is. Now, the octagonal pavement labyrinth at Reims Cathedral dates from around the year 1290, but it was destroyed in 1779. We are fortunate to have some drawings that record this labyrinth's design. One of the striking things about this labyrinth is it has octagonal pods, off, you could say, in the 4 quarters of the world. This is a record that was made of the labyrinth, so we can use it to determine what it originally looked like. You notice all the twists and turns in it, and there's various figures in those 4 pods and one at the central. Those are the medieval master masons who designed Reims Cathedral. And it's been a great interest, in part to architectural historians, because it helps piece together again the story of the cathedral. You know, the medieval master masons were renowned for their application of geometry in both a sacred and practical way. Here's a diagram or picture here of King Offa and a master mason. You notice that the master mason beside the king has the large Masonic compasses. They're about a yard or a meter high, and there's also a special instrument square there. These are all emblematic tools and symbols of the medieval master mason who would design these labyrinths in the cathedrals. It was held to be a high compliment for a stonemason to be referred to as a geometer. Just as God created creation through geometry, so the master mason, as a co-creator with God, would create the temple, the cathedral, as a microcosm of the macrocosm, as a geometric act, just like creation was a geometric act. Now, in terms of designing a medieval labyrinth, in particular the one at Reims, I'm going to show you steps by which I think that design was laid out, or one's very close to it. And one very similar was laid out in the Chamber of the Labyrinth at the Rosicrucian Regional Cultural Center in Toronto. And we've often had labyrinth walks there, and the center in general is very, very active serving that region of Canada. The labyrinth at Reims Cathedral and the one that is based on the same design in the Rosicrucian Cultural Center in Toronto would most likely have started with a square. Now, the octagonal pavement labyrinth at Rheims Cathedral was approximately 34 feet across. It's full in the distance. The one in the Rosicrucian Regional Cultural Center is scaled down, and instead of being on stone, it's on canvas. We would start with a square, and then there'd be, because it's going to have an octagonal design. I know many of you are interested in sacred number and geometry, so we'll do that, some of that with you right now. And this is important to understand as a mystic. A very important emblem and motif for the medieval master masons was the rotated squares. The square would rotate about its center, 45 degrees, and it would form this 8-pointed star. This is important to forming an octagon. Now, there's various ways in practice that one can simulate or create the rotated squares that form the help form the octagon, or the 8-pointed star. You could actually start with the square, form its diagonals, and you see here, and there's the center, and swing down the half diagonals here. That will give you the same proportioning as if you rotated the square about its center 45 degrees. Another way to do it is if you actually start with this inner dimension here, if you started there without, not the larger dimension, and formed, again, the diagonals of that square and swing out the half diagonals, it gives you the exact same proportioning. So sometimes when we're recreating how a cathedral would have been generated or a labyrinth, sometimes there could be a different sequence of events that are equivalent, but they're all working with the side of the square and its diagonal and swinging arcs. Another thing that we know from antiquity and through the medieval period, that sometimes in addition to using geometry, numbers were used not only for measurement units, but also to approximate the side of the square and its diagonal. In modern terminology today, we know it as square root of 2, but that's not the way that a medieval master mason would think. They'd think geometrically, and they'd also think that, for example, 17 by 24 is very close approximation to root 2. In other words, if you have a square that has a side of 17 units, its diagonal is almost exactly 24 units. And similarly, if you have a square of side 24, its diagonal is going to be almost exactly 34. So the Masons could use these whole number of approximations, either for 10 feet, 17 feet, 24 feet, 34 feet. They could create where the key points are on the first square to help you generate the 8-sided figure of the octagon here. And this is what we did when we were creating the labyrinth at the Rosicrucian Regional Cultural Center in Toronto. So we start with these rotated square to form the octagon or its equivalent operations that I showed you in the previous slide. And then you can join various important diagonals. You see from this part where the rotated square intersects the original square underneath, and you form all these diagonals in. These will be important guidelines for creating the labyrinth. So bear with me, all will be revealed. And again, you can also connect up even more lines with the connecting diagonals of the rotated square and further partition your octagon in this fashion. You'll see that you've got 4 sections in each quarter. So ultimately you have these 16 individual lines out from the center. These can be your guidelines for creating the octagonal labyrinth. Here, now you see how the labyrinth at Rheims is taking shape more and how they could have designed it. You are good to start with larger dimensions and work in. And we know that we want to have 11 annular octagons. So we have the outer octagon and then another octagon. So what we can do is we know the measurement unit properly. We can then space out those octagons and move into the center. So you can say specific points on these guidelines here, where your outer octagon here. And then next octagon, you measure in on your guidelines. You measure where those points are, and then you can connect up those points to form the next octagon. And you keep working in successively, equally spaced. These will ultimately be the paths. The space between these octagons is ultimately the path that you're going to be walking on when you walk the labyrinth. Down below, I've indicated some other numbers that could have been done in addition to the geometry with the numeric equivalent of having, say, 3 units in or 3 feet in, and then 14 feet in from the side, and then 25 feet in. These can be important points to determine where the inner octagon goes and where the outer octagon goes, and how you subdivide that to get the successive octagons. Now, at Rheims Cathedral, they had these octagonal pods that are in the 4 quarters. You could say representing the 4 quarters of the earth. We have our green and green here, our rectangle. We've got to work with it to form those pods. And one way to do that is form smaller octagons based around that outer green octagon and generate out the width of the path, the same width of the paths in the main body of the octagon. Now you may say, well, you know, how do we open up all these paths? Everything's sort of closed off inside each octagon. So we got to start opening things up here. And one way to do that is how to get into this octagonal pad when you're walking the main body of the octagon is you can form lines out from these octagonal shapes of the outer pods. And then you can remove the excess where you do not need to have those parts of the octagon, and you can start to form openings up for the path. And we continue that way, and see now we have our openings to the octagonal path. When the masons are working, they have their various templates and measurements, and they can also scrape away or sand off what they don't wish to be reviewed or to be seen later. Now we've got this in the one corner, we can then by symmetry do it in the 3 other corners. You see? We're starting to get closer and closer to that diagram that was recorded at Rheims Cathedral. Now we want to start opening up and closing various parts of these main body octagons for the twists and turns of the labyrinth, right? So what we can do here is we can then open up and close off spaces here. So gradually we're making our circuits of paths. And we'll keep going, and we'll do that where we're going to have our main entrance here. You see the labyrinth is taking shape here. And ultimately, we can go back to just the one color in black, and we have the labyrinth at Rheims before us. This is how the master masons would have designed it, or something very close to it, and how we did it at the Rosicrucian Regional Cultural Center. I'd like to mention a little bit more to you about the history of labyrinths and their symbolism while you've got this beautiful diagram before you. You can, you know, I've mentioned the ones about the cathedrals and various labyrinths of the world. You know, garden labyrinths or hedge mazes were very important in Elizabethan England later. Maybe you've had the opportunity to walk a hedge maze. They're labyrinths and mazes in general use of English language. Often those terms are used interchangeably. However, people who study labyrinths or walk labyrinths, or you might say labyrinth practitioners, often make a strong distinction between a labyrinth and a maze. You can think of a labyrinth as having only one path, unicursal, and there isn't multiple choices or multicursal like that you have in a maze. In a maze, there can be dead ends and multiple entrances and exits. In this more technical sense of a labyrinth, you have the one entrance. There's no confusion of choices. You just keep going, following the center of that. You will make your way to the center. Often people are surprised by how long it takes to get to the center, because you remember those 11 annular octagons that I showed you earlier? You've got to traverse every single one of those. Plus, with a labyrinth that's got octagonal pods, you've got to traverse all of those as well. So you can end up walking much further than you expect. Now, labyrinths are dynamic and multi-layer symbols. And looking at this in a way, you can think of it like a sacred diagram. You know, we're looking off from here in the west entrance in the east, looking off to the west, and then we have our north and our south. So in a way, it's a cosmic diagram matching a microcosm with a macrocosm, and it can symbolize dynamic order. You may even be sensing visual and optical effect like this labyrinth is like pulsating before you. And it'd be fitting that it can symbolize cosmic order and energy. It can also symbolize as a microcosm self. You know, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung and Jungian psychology, they look at the labyrinth as you traverse it as a journey into wholeness, which we've been doing throughout our lives and our lifetimes. And we do our special mystical exercise. You can think of this as you're passing through what you've experienced already in this incarnation or incarnations to come. You can think of it as a journey and a pilgrimage to the source and the involvement of cosmic consciousness. You know, the labyrinths as medieval cathedrals, we have some records about how they would have been used. It's thought, for example, the one at Chartres, it was important that it was a journey to the center, an imagined journey, very real to our inner nature, to going to Jerusalem, which is a way, the symbol of the heavenly Jerusalem, the heavenly state, our state of the Rose Choir unified consciousness. Labyrinths were also said at times to be danced on, and particularly at Easter. The labyrinth was also Christianized in the sense of the Theseus slaying the Minotaur was now the sense of now Christ, or the master Yeshua, or the person walking the labyrinth in the pattern of Christ was being a victorious combatant against evil, in going through the challenges of making their way through life in the labyrinth. Now, labyrinths can be a walking contemplation and a walking meditation. I know that's part of the reason why our Grand Master was instrumental in having a labyrinth placed at Rosicrucian Park in San Jose, California. And in that way, labyrinth and walking the labyrinth as we go in and move through it can help with the Rosicrucian sequence of processes involving analysis, contemplation, concentration, meditation, visualization, and acting on our inner impressions. Now, I'm going to say a little more before we begin our mystical exercise, but Sora Karen, you can now post or paste in the group chat the resources that people can access for a little later. One of the profound things I want to mention to you about labyrinths is that you can think of them as your passage in life. That walking a labyrinth is complementary to the mystical symbols of climbing up and down the spiritual mountain, or rising up the mystic spiral as you move around and around into the center. These movements and twists of the labyrinth parallel our own growth and self-mastery, unconditional love and service. Through the mystical stages or traditional stages of spiritual growth, the awakening, followed by purgation, followed by illumination, followed by the obscure night, or more poetically, the dark night of the soul, and finally the union, or mystical union. This is the path that we're all on, and bear this in mind when we do our mystical exercise. I'll show a few little more things. You should have an opportunity now to get those resources that have been posted in the group chat. One of the last things I want to tell you about the inner meaning, and in a way some would call the secret of design. And you won't see this very often, because we're going to apply what modern mathematicians call topology. It's a type of geometry that deals with invariance under deformation, which is in a very technical way of saying that squares or octagons are equivalent to circles. We're just interested in how there's holes or how they have paths and twists in them. You know, with these 11 paths, octagonal labyrinths, such as at Amiens or at Rams, or in a circular form, which is topologically equivalent at Chartres Cathedral. You can number how far in you are from the outside, and we'll say the outside, or where your entrance is level 0. And first path in is 1, second way in is 2, and you can go all the way into 11 and ultimately 12 to the inside. And you can use that to characterize sort of the hidden or inner design of Chartres Cathedral's labyrinth, or Amiens Cathedral's labyrinth, or in this case, what was Rheims Cathedral labyrinth. If you start on the outside at the entrance at 0, the outside, you notice how you go in, you go past the first 2 rings in, so to speak, and you start to come into a path that's 3 rings in. So you can characterize that as 0, 3. And then you follow that around, keep going around, keep focused on the center, and then you backtrack onto the second ring. So you can say, well, now I've gone 0, 3, 2. And if you keep following that around and around, being very patient, now I come to the first ring, it's 1. So I've gone 0, 3, 2, 1. You can keep following that and you'll get this pattern all the way into the center. You see, with our labyrinth, instead of having the 4 master masons and the central master mason like at Rheims Cathedral, we decided to make it an alchemical labyrinth. And we've had the 4 elements with their protonic solid symbolism, including the dodecahedron and the quintessence at the center. So this is the pattern you go through on the different levels, or what ring you're in, as you move from 0 all the way into 12, from the fire to the air, the water, the earth, all the way through to the quintessence in the center. And then it would just repeat in the exact opposite order, exiting. But you'll notice there's various patterns in the various levels you go through. 3, 2, 1, 2 gets repeated again to 3, 2, 1, 3. 3, 2, 1, 2 gets repeated again on your way to fire, which is here. And then on your way to air over here, you just stay on 4. But then when you go to air over to the water way over here, you go through 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, then 7, 6, 5, 4, and then that gets repeated again after you leave Earth on the way to the quintessence. So there's this beautiful underlying order and symmetry that you're going to have a very different experience of, because when we walk the labyrinth or simulate that, you saw how the geometry was laid out. You've seen the topology now and the symmetry. Now you're going to have what this topology and that geometry does to act on your mind in a psychological and spiritual way. When we built the labyrinth at the Rosicrucian Regional Cultural Center, we applied all these things, and here we have some Rosicrucian students working on the labyrinth. The sacred diagram is slowly but surely manifesting in the chamber of the labyrinth at the Rosicrucian Regional Cultural Center. And we're laying a high quality black electrical tape, or electrician's tape, on a small canvas lamp, and it's scaled down version of the Rheims Cathedral labyrinth. When it's completed, with the symbolic designs of the 4 elements and the quintessence at the center, it looked like this. And you can, at the very center, here's the dodecahedron and the symbol for the quintessence. We also put an 8-petaled and 10-petaled 4 rows in there, so the labyrinth would form a great rosy cross. When we walked the labyrinth, we put lights out, and then people could walk it with often some medieval chant music or singing, for example, from the mystic Hildegard von Bingen. Bear this image in mind, because we'll use it now in our mystical exercise. You're going to have a journey to the center. We'll need to be steadfast and patient. Now, if you can, safely turn off the lights in your room or pull down the blinds to make it as dark as possible in your room, I suggest that, though it's not absolutely necessary. I'll give you a moment to do that, and if you have any last copying of the resources you want to do. Now, in this special mystical exercise, on the labyrinth, we can use this as an opportunity to rededicate ourselves on the mystical and Rosicrucian path. Please focus your concentration now on the lit candle and the center of the path as we start to move. And imagine yourself walking the labyrinth holding this candle, symbolic of your inner light. So let us focus on the candle. As stated by past Chief Executive Officer of the Rosicrucian Order, AMORC, past Imperator Christian Bernard, where we are and as we are, we must be the light which illuminates the souls of others. It is the only way to point out the road that all humanity must follow to emerge from the dark labyrinth it has entered. As in life, with patience and steadfastness, we will reach our goal. As in life, the process is as important as the goal. Now say with me out loud or inwardly, fire, intuition, awakening. As stated by the past Chief Executive Officer, Imperator Sir Francis Bacon in his preface to the Insaturo Magna, or Great Restoration, the universe to the eye of the human understanding is framed like a labyrinth. Our steps must be guided by a clue, and the whole way from the very first perception of the senses must be laid out on a sure plan. Now say with me, air, thought, purgation. As stated in the Quest of the Holy Grail, which itself follows a labyrinth pattern and veils esoteric laws and principles, you were once closer to it than you are today, and yet are closer now than you were before, if you hold fast to what you have embarked on. Now say with me, water, emotion, illumination. Now say with me, earth, sensation, obscure night. as stated by the traditional Rosicrucian Dante Alighieri in his great journey related in the Divine Comedy, which itself follows a labyrinth pattern. From there, his counsels from the God within have drawn me up, ascending and circling the mountain, which makes you straight, whom the world made crooked. Now say with me, cosmos and quintessence. Consciousness of the cosmos. Union. Now let us place a red rose at the center of the labyrinth. Let us unite in invocation. We dedicate this labyrinth and ourselves, both microcosms and macro of the macrocosm, to cosmic principles and universal service. We sanctify this labyrinth and ourselves. Like unto a great rose cross, to the work and worship of the mystical path and the Rosicrucian order Amorc. The good service, goodwill, and love that will radiate from ourselves and the use of this labyrinth. We extend a prayer of thanks and appreciation for the blessings already enjoyed in our lives and in the work and for the privilege of having this labyrinth manifested before us. May the two fundamental rules that guided the formation of this labyrinth, God is the first law and God geometricizes, ever guide us in its use and in our lives. May the God of our hearts bless us and this labyrinth and all those who approach us in it and journey with us. Let us now meditate for a few moments on the Rosicrucian laws and principles portrayed by this labyrinth. I wish to close your eyes and take a few deep breaths, feeling centered at the labyrinth, heart, at the center of your being, and at the center of the cosmos. Now let us prepare to close this meditation. So be it in truth, so mote it be. Now, just as the Master Yeshua and his 3 specially chosen disciples descended from Mount Tabor after the Master Yeshua's transfiguration to return back to the world in service based on the illumination, let us so too depart from the center, always knowing that it is with us inwardly. Look for beauty in the beasts. They will rejoice to feel that wonder and glory with all their zeal at first, to denote the mainstream cosmic consciousness made supreme, to protect their own with rebirth, to all that joy made manifest, even in the earth. From life's beginning material, derived its source from the immaterial, displays differing degrees of light, life, and love. Each success creates yet another dove, striving to surpass its conscious shell towards an attained perfection, the beautifully completed and wondrous cell, whose perfection, a wondrous process, resembles the clay and potter, even in the water. Look for beauty in simple things. In so doing, they will take wings and fly heavenward, where they can strive for beauty, even in the air. Through the golden fire burn, its ultimate power for which we yearn. With its power, you can transmute our earthly fire into your heavenly fire, to sweep away all the dross of unwanted desire. Transmute your earthly body into your heavenly body of light, day by day, fulfilling by pure heavenly desire, even in the fire. In journeying the labyrinth, one ascends and descends the alchemical order of evolution and consciousness. As Hermes counseled, separate the fire from the earth, and from the earth it ascends to heaven and descends again, newborn to earth. So too, a dictum in alchemy states, learn to convert the elements, and you will have the secret to the magistry. So be it in truth, so mote it be. This concludes the rededication of the labyrinth and ourselves on the mystical and Rosicrucian path.